The Sign of the Chrysanthemum by Catherine Patterson. Chapter 15. Death of Dreams. There was a rage pounding in his head, not since he had seen his young wife lying dead beside the body of their stillborn son had Fukuji known such a rage. The Ronin would have marveled at the transformation, the steel-cold man in the white heat of madness. He made a roaring fire within the forge. The reflected flames burned like the furnaces of hell in his eyes as he plunged the strip of metal into the fire. He was naked to the waist, and the sweat rolled in streams from his shoulders. With the tongs, he took the glowing metal to the anvil and brought the giant hammer down upon it. Clang! 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 And with every clang a voice broke out in an agonized shout. Yah! 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 As though the metal itself cried out. At last, rage spent, he cast the tortured steel into the rubbish and extinguished the fire. He drew water from the well and poured it over his head and body. When he had dressed himself, he fell upon the mat floor in exhausted sleep. Fukuji? He was awake at once, but it was not the boy. Muratani of the Heike had come. The boy's message had been a strange one. Was all well with the master? The boy has left my service. And the sword? Ah, the sword. Shall I look for him, Fukuji? Has he done you injury? No, no. It is a private affair. I will look for him myself. For a while, neither spoke. Then the samurai said gently, How may I serve you, uncle? The older man looked up, startled by Muratani's warm language. No one called him uncle. His manner forbade the common familiarities of speech. But now the samurai's kind tone comforted him. The boy has a father, somewhere. And it may be that Lord Kayamori could find him. But you and Lord Kayamori are not on cordial terms. How do you know that? The samurai laughed. A swordsmith who refused to make a sword for the emperor's highest-ranking officer will not, in any case, fail to make news. Let me speak a word in your behalf, sir. It could do no harm. I would be grateful for that. Within the day, the word came that Lord Kayamori would welcome the swordsmith at his Rokuhara mansion. Always meticulous, Fukuji bathed and dressed the following morning with even more than his usual care, and refusing Muratani's offer of a sedan chair, walked across Gojo Bridge and presented him at Rokuhara well before noon. Ah, Fukuji! Lord Kayamori waved him to a cushion near his own. How long has it been? 2 years now? Fukuji nodded in reply. He had always liked Kayamori, for the general was a true man, unlike most of the soft-skinned aristocrats that pranced about the emperor. Wine was brought, and as they drank, Kayamori talked in his rough, unpolished manner of the summer weather, of his elder son's slow progress in his sword-fighting lessons. He spoke, too, of his father and his desire to make a pilgrimage in the dead man's honor. Fukuji had listened to the general's ramblings, alert for an opening. This seemed to be it. Your father was a great and good man, my lord. Always. How fortunate you were to have had such a father. Yes. Both men knew what everyone in the capital knew, that when Tadamori of the Heike had married the courtesan known as the Lady of Gion, he had taken her bastard son and raised him as his own. But the bond between father and son had been such that only a fool brought up the question of blood ties, and that fool only once. My lord Kayumari, the favor I come to beg, yes, your favor, swordsmith. It concerns a boy who... He paused. Actually, I need information. The general chuckled. You've come to the wrong place. Rumors reach me last of all. Ask any of my retainers. No, this concerns a man, a samurai, who bears a tattoo, a tiny chrysanthemum tattoo on his left shoulder. Do you know such a man? I should think so, Kayumori said heartily. There were about 200 of us at the beginning. 200? At the beginning. It was a youthful stunt. After one of the voyages to the inland sea, when my father took me pirate chasing, a group of us took it into our heads to honor our great victories with a suitable tattoo. He refilled both cups. I'm told it started quite a rage for chrysanthemum tattoos at the time, some of which... He wiped his mouth on his sleeve, and above the brocade his eyes twinkled. Some of which were obviously regretted later. Fashions in politics being what they are, and tattoos, alas. He spread his hands in mock dismay. I see. Quite hopeless, then. Well, surely your samurai has some sort of body upon which this tattoo of his is fixed. Come now, you must tell me what else you know of him besides his wretched little chrysanthemum. And the general pressed the swordsmith until at last Fukuji told him all he knew about the boy, except that he had stolen a sword. I fear for the child, alone and without friends or money in our troubled city. I do not know to what end this search of his may lead him. He dropped his gaze, aware that Kayumori was studying him as he spoke. Ah, my poor Fukuji, he said in a voice usually reserved for women, if you so crave a son, why do you not marry again? I desire no son, he replied, and knew only as he heard his own words that he lied. I have ways of finding people, the general said quietly. I could find the boy within hours, and it is not impossible that I might find his father as well, if that is what you desire. Tell me when the boy was born. We have records of who goes to Awa and for what official purposes. No one can be trusted, as you know. I should be grateful. Grateful enough, and Fukuji looked up to see why the general hesitated. Grateful enough to change your mind? He took a long sip of wine, and waited. Forgive me, my lord. I was wrong to come. I cannot make you a sword. No. The voice was not angry. Your feud with Yoshitomo of the Genji hangs over the city like a giant millstone on a thread. Should I hand you a sword to cut that thread? Fukuji, you are a sword maker, not a child. The general rose and began to stride back and forth. What do you imagine men do with swords? Hang them in their sashes for decorations? I know what some men do with swords. Oh, it is easy for you to posture righteousness, Fukuji. Kiyomori hurled about to face him. My uncle was a traitor. Do you think I wished to kill him? Would I be more worthy in your eyes if I had stood aside like a bawling woman and ordered his death at another's hand? I cannot judge such matters, sir. Oh, but you do judge, Fukuji. You make the instruments of death and then judge the men that use them. Bah! Do you know you are a hypocrite, swordsmith? A hypocrite? Yes, Fukuji replied. I know. He bowed toward the general's angry back and left the room without waiting to be dismissed. Fukuji began his search in the marketplace near his shop. He walked slowly, casually nodding at acquaintances, but then he would hear a word or a laugh that would jerk his head towards its source, but it was never the face he looked for. By dusk, he had worked his way through the streets of the artisans and the body district until before him loomed the great ghostly bulk of Rashomon, whose tower, some said, held the rotting flesh of the outcast dead, and under whose shadow crept the scum of the living. He walked slowly from booth to booth, buying nothing, speaking to no one, not really looking at those things his eyes seemed to be examining, for all his senses were straining for evidence of the boy's whereabouts. And then he saw him. He was huddled against a pillar as though he was freezing, though the evening air was hot and humid. Fukuji stepped into the shadow of a booth. What should he say? How could he approach the boy? Muna would think he had come for vengeance. Better not speak until Muna could see his face and know that he did not come in anger. He began to move toward the portico. The boy jumped to his feet. Fukuji could see he was quivering. Muna! He shouted, but the boy ran into the darkness of the portico. He might have found him. The boy more than likely had darted into one of the openings in the tower. He might even now be gazing out at him. But he forced himself to turn around. He had been a fool to come, a fool to go to Rokuhara, a fool to think he could find the boy, or that he should. Muna was not some metal the swordsmith could pound to his own design. He was nearly a man. He must find his own way. It was a long time before Muna's body, pressed against the damp stones of the tower wall, ceased to shake. In the blackness, he listened for the sound of Fukuji's step. He listened so intently that he heard it, beyond any doubt, 5 or 6 times, only to have it come to nothing. Gradually, the fear that he was caught turned to a more terrible kind of fear. The fear that he was not to be caught at all. He was a thief and a traitor. He deserved his punishment, but for some perverse reason, known only to that strange, inscrutable man, he was not to be given it. Fukuji would go home and take out his zither and sing a sad song that would explain it all. But no one would be there to hear it. We are dead to each other, I suppose, thought Muna, and all that ever bound us is buried on the mountain. He tried to be glad, for he was free now. He had no obligations that anyone wished him to repay. He should feel relief. But all he felt was a great black emptiness. It even had an odor, this feeling, strongly sweet, laced to memory of plague and typhoon. It stung in his nostrils, invading his throat and belly. He thrashed his arms about in the darkness, struggling to find the opening through which he had entered. He stumbled in his left hand, fell into a mass of horse's mane? What insanity! Too soft for a horse, no. What hell had he fallen into? There is no question. He recognized the smell now. He snatched up his hand, stumbling across the whatever lay there, and clawed at the walls until he found the slit. To the well he ran, as though all the rotting ghouls of the netherworld were at his feet, but wash as he might, the odor clung. He dreamed that night. The great warrior in his gold-horned helmet came again, holding out his arms, and Muna ran to them with all his might. "Father, Father," he cried with joy. But the face that looked down into his own was a grinning skull.